which will become maybe part of our discussion later. But first, let's catch up on what the series is about. The series follows two intertwined stories, but the driving plot is the story of Lily, who's an employee at Amaya, who is this big tech company, who starts to investigate the dev department when her boyfriend Sergey disappears after working there after just one day. The story we'll be following up a bit more closely, though, is the story of Forrest, the founder of Amaya. Within Amaya, there is a secret department called Devs, which is working on a supercomputer who is able to calculate the future and the past by analyzing data from the present. The Devs team is mainly formed of 4 people. We've got, obviously, Forrest, the head of Amaya and Devs. We've got Katie, Forrest's assistant, who's basically second in command. And then we have Lyndon, who's a young engineer whose main work is working on the sound. And he really likes the Everett interpretation, which we'll look at later. And we've got Stuart, who's an engineer who is starting to be a bit critical about the whole project. Finally, this is how the computer looks like. It's a quantum computer with an enormous calculating speed and unimaginable memory, which makes calculations of the objects around the world and projects the past and the future onto a screen. Now, whilst this computer seems to be a product of modern thought, as it's rooted in quantum computing and quantum physics, the original concept actually may have come from ancient Greeks, such as Democritus and Epicurus. Then it traveled to the Roman Empire with Cicero, but finally it was formalized as we know it by Laplace. Laplace tells the story of a demon known, well, today known as Laplace's demon, who knows the speed and position of all objects of the universe, and by doing so is able to know all the causes of the present, but also what the consequences will be, therefore knowing the future. In this way, he's able to trace back physical actions, and by doing so, predict the future. Laplace's demon is set in sort of a classical physics worldview. Isaac Newton's physics is, in fact, looks at the universe sort of like a billiard ball, right? Where equations are set by positions, speed, and the forces of interacting objects. For example, in classical physics, if we see a pen dropping, we can look at still image of a pen dropping. And by knowing the speed and the constant of gravity, we're able to know how high the pen dropped. It's for this reason that Laplace's demon wasn't much of a horror story at the time, but almost an inspiration that if we had the technology, we would be able to achieve. This was until this lot arrived, who re-evolutionized physics. We've got Einstein, Planck, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, and many great minds who came together for that first Solvay conference, which is this picture over here, who understood that physics wasn't that simple. The birth of quantum theory introduced concepts such as the uncertainty principle that says that you cannot measure exactly the position and the speed of a particle. It brought superposition, a state where a particle can have completely different attributes at the same time until a measurement is performed. Like the most famous example of this is Schrödinger's cat, where a cat in a box can be dead and alive at the same time until the box is opened. These and many other weird concepts in quantum theory moved away from Laplace's demon idea, where we don't see the universe as a block universe where the future, past, and present are equally real and already determined, but yet we have more of a growing block where the past and present are well defined, but the future is open to fluctuation and uncertainty. Now, returning to Devs, Forrest is a firm believer in determinism and the block universe, and makes his mission to create a computer with the abilities of Laplace's demon. He is aware, however, of the different interpretations of quantum mechanics, so he needs to find an interpretation coherent with how the universe works that allows determinism. For this reason, he turns to Bohm and de Broglie, who have the theory also known as the hidden variables theory. Let's look at what it says. Now, like most interpretations of quantum mechanics, this interpretation has origins in the double slit experiment. This is more or less the setup. We have a source on the left that shoots particles towards a barrier that has two slits in it, and where the particles are able to pass through these slits, and we have a detector on the other side to see what pattern these particles make. The result shows the detector shows an interference pattern, a pattern that a wave would make, basically. And so it's as if the particles, which were assumed to be billiard balls, had interfered with each other to form this wave-like pattern. Now, let's modify this experiment to figure out what slit the particle has gone through. To do so, we put a counter in front of each slit, which counts the number of particles that it goes through. Now we see that the pattern has changed. The pattern now looks like billiard balls have gone through these slits without interfering with each other. The result is baffling. Why has this result changed? In more orthodox interpretations of quantum physics, this experiment shows that the world has elements of probability and indetermination. But Bohm has another idea, maybe even bringing physics back to a classical view. Bohm and de Broglie suggest that the particle doesn't have the wave-particle duality that quantum physics suggests. Bohm says that the particle behaves like a wave. In the double slit experiment, the particle is guided by a pilot wave, a wave that interacts with its environment, modifying itself depending on how the experiment is set up, and guides the particle in a path that follows the configuration of the wave. The interesting aspect about the pilot wave is that it can be calculated, as mathematicians Chris Dewdney and Basil Hiley had proven with this image in 1979. In the same way, the trajectories as well of the particles can be calculated, which is impossible within orthodox quantum theory. So Bohm in this way looks like it brought physics back to a billiard ball universe. As much as the theory seems to work for the devs computer, the team seems to struggle to make it work in the exact way they want to. The projected image have a lot of interference and the audio is muffled and you can't really make out any words. So Lyndon, who is in charge of the audio, has a bit of a breakthrough. He decides to drop the quantum potential and other elements of Bohm's theory and instead inserts elements of the Everett interpretation, which is also known as the multiverse theory. The results shocked the team as they finally managed to create a perfect audio projection of Jesus's dying words in Aramaic. However, because Forrest is convinced that Bohm's must be the only theory that will make the system work, he fires Lyndon. The reason for this is that hearing Jesus's words through the multiverse theory, he says, it's not our Jesus, it's a Jesus. To which Lyndon replies, yeah, but it's the same fucking Jesus. This criticism towards Everett is not an uncommon one, actually. I remember during a conference here in Paris, there was Basil Hiley speaking, and he was presenting Bohm's theory, and someone challenged him by saying that Everett and Bohm's theories are actually compatible together. To which Basil Hiley said, I am not worried about other universes, even if there are any. I'm only worried about this one. So, to understand why, to understand this Everett interpretation, let's look at it. So, Everett's theory can be interpreted as deterministic, as everything that has happened and will happen will always happen in a universe. To explain this, I'm going to use a bit of probability theory. Let's say, for example, if you flip a coin, there's roughly 50% chance that it will be heads and 50% chance that it will be tails. In the Everett interpretation, there is actually 100% chance that it will be heads and 100% chance that it will be tails. It just depends what universe you're looking at. So, for example, in quantum theory, say you have the probability of a particle being in a state, let me start again. In quantum theory, you have a particle being in one state or another. And there's, say, a 60% chance it's going to be in one state and 40% chance it's going to be another. In the evident interpretation, it actually means that this probability actually refers to what universe we belong to. So there's, with the same example, there's a 60% chance we belong in the universe where particle A is in state A, and a 40% chance that we belong in a universe where the particle is in state B. I hope that was clear enough. So even if the evident interpretation does seem to work for the dev team, Lyndon is not being admitted back. Lyndon is desperate to be brought back into the team, so he meets Katie at a bridge to ask to be invited back. Together, they come up with a test to prove that the evident interpretation is correct. If he stands on the edge of a bridge, there'll be an infinite amount of random fluctuations that will determine whether he will fall or not. If he doesn't fall, then the multiverse theory is correct, and the dev team must welcome back Lyndon into the team. If not, he will fall and die. Let's look at the results.
I work all day and get half drunk at night, waking at 4 to soundless dark. I stare. In time, the curtain edges will grow light. Till then, I see what's always really there. Unresting death. The mind blanks at the glare. Not in remorse. The good not done, the love not given, time torn off unused. But at the total emptiness forever. The sure extinction that we travel to and shall be lost in always. Not to be here, not to be anywhere. And soon, nothing more terrible, nothing more true. This is a special way of being afraid. No trick dispels. Religion used to try. That vast moth-eaten musical brocade created to pretend we never die. And specious stuff that says no rational being can fear a thing it will not feel. Not seeing that this is what we fear. No sight, no sound, no touch or taste or smell. Nothing to think with, nothing to love or link with. The anesthetic from which none come round. And so it stays just on the edge of vision, a small unfocused blur. A standing chill that slows each impulse down to indecision. Most things will never happen. This one will.
So, personally, this is actually one of my favorite scenes of the whole series, as to me it captures the whole mood of the show, as high tension, anxiety, uncertainty, and also it had that amazing shot of Lyndon falling over and over again. So for me, there are two interesting aspects of the scene which are most striking. So the first one is obviously the shot of Lyndon's fall. The scene shows Lyndon falling over and over again in various ways in the same shot, implying that yes, the multiverse does exist. However, Lyndon will not only fall in this universe, but in all universes. He will always have fallen in all universes. Sorry. And the second thing that I love about this scene is the poem recited in the background. So the poem is Aubade by Philip Larkin, and it's delivered by Stuart, who's the engineer at Devs. So the poem itself is sort of interpreted as a memento mori, the reminder of the inescapability of death. For Philip Larkin, in the early hours of the morning, death appears as a vivid image to which there is no consolation. He says that religion had tried to console humanity. However, now, whether it's due to the fact of the death of God or that religion doesn't even talk to us anymore, it's not enough. This nihilistic view creates great terror and anxiety for Larkin. However, as dawn breaks, the daily activities and routine resume. However depressing yet beautiful this poem is, Stuart's recital to me appear even bleaker, put in context of the series and this scene. Stuart, with this poem, not only acknowledges the death that the dev's computer is responsible for, as it caused two deaths of spies in previous episodes, and now even Lyndon's death, his friend. But now that the computer is fully functional, Stuart realizes that he has now witnessed the death of free will. The fact that the machine is functional is proof that we live in a deterministic world, and that we are following the tram lines laid for us by determinism. This interpretation of the poem is underlined when Stuart changes the last line of the poem from the original, which is most things may never happen, this one will, to most things will never happen, this one will. So basically he's omitted the may, as the computer knows everything that will happen and what won't, but no room for uncertainty. Now, after looking at this poem, let's approach the problem philosophically. What are the consequences of the death of free will? If we had proof that we're living in a deterministic world, I think most of us would start to experience some sort of existential anxiety. If the choices we make now were determined by the past, are our choices free? If we have no choices, then we can have freedom. And without freedom, are we just blindly following the tramline set to us? Philosophers have been pondering over these questions for millennia, and philosophers do have their own answers and propositions towards these problems, but they didn't really have any proof whether determinism was real or not. Forrest now does. He is a believer that free will is an illusion, that the universe is deterministic, so he has set his mission to prove this by building the dev's computer. But here's a question. Why is he desperately trying to prove that free will is an illusion? Why does he want to give up his free will by proving that he doesn't have any? Throughout the series, we learned that Forrest, who is a troubled, remorseful character, was happily married with a daughter named Amaya. One day, as his wife and daughter are driving home, Forrest is on the phone to them, and they're involved in a fatal car accident. Following this event, he founded a big tech company called Amaya, after his daughter, and then created the dev department. With this backstory, the audience is given an insight into the motivations of creating this machine. I have a clip here from episode 1, which may give us an insight. So the clip shows Sergey, who's Lily's boyfriend, who, when he saw the dev's code, he was shocked and decided to steal it. However, when he goes back home, he is caught by Forrest. I actually did share this clip on Facebook, and I did give a trigger warning saying that it does contain graphical violence. I'm going to omit it. I'm going to cut it early, but enjoy.
The universe is deterministic.
Sorry?
The universe is deterministic. It's godless and neutral and defined only by physical laws. The marble rolls because it was pushed. The man eats because he's hungry. An effect is always the result of a prior cause. The life we lead, with all its apparent chaos, is actually a life on tram lines. Prescribed, undeviating, deterministic. I know it doesn't feel that way, Sergei. We fall into an illusion of free will because the tram lines are invisible. And we feel so certain about our subjective state. Our feelings, our opinions, judgments, decisions. You joined my company, gained our trust, gained my trust, then stole my code on your James Bond wristwatch.
I don't know what you mean.
That would appear to be the result of some decisions, wouldn't it? About where you placed your allegiance, about who you would betray. But if we live in a deterministic universe, then those decisions can only have been the result of something prior. Where you were born, how you were brought up, the physical construction of your particular brain. It's the nature-nurture matrix, exactly like the nematode worm in your simulation. It's more complex, more nuanced, but still, at the end of the day, cause and effect. I hope you understand what I'm saying, Sergei. This is forgiveness. This is absolution. You made no decision to betray me. You could only have done what you did.
So, what has he said? He basically said, if determinism is true, all your actions were predetermined. You couldn't have done otherwise. And for this reason, you're absolved. And this is basically why he wants to build the death machine. He's trying to find an explanation for his family's death without holding any more responsibility. If free will doesn't exist, then I can't be responsible for my actions. There you go. And here's another interesting quote here that Katie says to Forrest as she catches on his motivation. She says, I think death is how you put yourself on trial. It's judge and jury. If it works, determinism precludes free will and you're absolved. You did no wrong. But if it doesn't work, you had choices and you're guilty. This approach to moral responsibility is actually a pretty valid one, shared by many philosophers, such as Peter Inwagen, who argues that moral responsibility and determinism are incompatible, as a person is only morally responsible for an action only if they could have acted otherwise. This argument is also known as the principle of alternate possibilities, or PAP. As fun as determinism without moral responsibility looks fun, this has also been heavily criticized. A philosopher that has found a way out of this by granting moral responsibility in a deterministic worldview is Harry Frankfurt, with this interesting example. Now, he usually talks about Mr. Black. I'm going to talk about Tommy Shelby. So Mr. Tommy Shelby, a mafia boss, wants Jones, one of his goons, to kill someone. The powerful Mr. Shelby has the ability and the will to go to extreme measures to ensure that Jones will kill the designated person, but won't show his hand unless necessary. Jones, therefore, may be under the illusion that he has a free will and a free choice in the matter, even if Shelby will ensure that he has no choice. Let's say that Jones, out of his own volition, decides to follow Shelby's orders and kills. Did Jones act out of his own free will? But more importantly, is he morally responsible for his actions, as he couldn't have done otherwise? Frankfurt claims that even if he didn't act out of his free will, he should still be accountable for his actions, as he had decided to commit this crime, even if he wasn't aware that he couldn't have done otherwise. Now, back to devs. The computer can make past projections as far back as the early stages of human evolution. But when looking at the future, it's got its limitations. The computer cannot see beyond the time when Lily visits the dev's facility. This is revealed to Lily when she decides to do the opposite of what is predicted for her by not going to the dev's lab. However, no matter how hard she tries, she does go to the lab the next day. At the lab, she watches on screen her predicted future. Her future is predicted to show that she will shoot Forrest in the elevator, the airlock seal will break, and the elevator will fall to the ground, killing her and Forrest. After watching the prediction, Lily initially does follow the path, holding Forrest at gunpoint until they reach the elevator. However, just before the door closes, she throws away the gun, acting against the projection. Forrest's dismay over his entire belief system being proven wrong is actually short-lived, as Stewart, who has been reciting poetry on the other side of the elevator, decides that the project must end, breaks the airlock seals, sabotages the magnetic elevator they're riding in, the elevator falls, and it kills both Forrest and Lily. In this way, the prediction is fulfilled, even though inaccurately. This chain of events actually explains why the computer cannot predict beyond Lily's death. Whatever the computer predicts, Lily will disobey it, and this way creates a paradox. When finishing the series, we noticed that only 3 characters have seen a significant future projection on the dev's machine. These people are Forrest, Katie, and Lily, and each one of them have a different reaction to it. Forrest and Katie, as we have seen, follow the machine religiously, following the tram lines and obeying the predictions set to them. Forrest, however, has moments where he has doubts, and he has doubts over his faith in the machine, such as this moment where they're contemplating the screen, and he says, "I am scared we might be magicians. What if we project 1 minute into the future right now? What if 1 minute into the future we see you fold your arms?" And you say, "Fuck the future, I'm a magician. My magic breaks tram lines. I'm not going to fold my arms." You put your hands in your pocket and keep them there until the time runs out. However, as soon as Forrest says this, Katie, who has an unwavering faith in the machine and the whole project, quickly dismisses Forrest and says that they must follow the tram line. The relationship that Forrest and Katie have with the machine is actually similar to the relationship a priest may have with God, as it rests on a strong faith that must not be shaken. The religious aspect is hinted throughout the series with a series of images. In this image, for example, Forrest is in a forest, excuse the pun, with lights surrounding the trunks. And in several shots, Forrest is positioned in this way so that the light resembles a halo. While Forrest looks like a saint, another religious element is Lyndon's death, which sacrifices himself in the name of his belief in the quantum theory interpretation. And so in this way, he's almost like a martyr who has died for his beliefs. Even the devs department is in a sort of discreet location, remote building surrounded by these golden monoliths who are supposed to act as a Faraday cage, but it almost looks like a temple. Even the inside of the dev department has golden walls and has this floating lift and floating lab, which is suspended by electromagnetic waves, but it could even be magic or a miracle. Forrest, in the last episode, even declares himself as the Messiah who created and revealed the God system, which for him is the devs machine. This comes with a major reveal in the series, that the name of devs is not short for development, it's actually Latin, where the V and the U is the same letter. Devs therefore becomes Deus, which means God in Latin. The only other person who sees a future prediction is Lily, who sees herself die. Leahy's relationship with the machine is to challenge it by trying to find purely random events that the machine could not predict. First, she says that a flip of a coin is a random event with a 50% chance. This was quickly dismissed as it actually can be predicted by calculating the force of the flip, air resistance, air humidity, and so on, all aspects that can be calculated. Then she says that choosing between identical objects is random. For example, if you're at a newsagent and you want to choose a newspaper at a shop where there are many copies of the same paper, what the paper you choose must be a random event. However, this too is dismissed as, you may choose a second one from the top if you believe that it will be less touched and cleaner, or if you're in a rush, you may just get the one from the top. After she sees what is predicted to her, she decides that she will be the magician that Forrest was referring to earlier and disobey the system. In fact, Forrest, who's proclaimed himself as the Messiah at this point, calls her action the original sin, a sin that has destroyed the Garden of Eden, which is the determinism that the Dev's machine proved. When they both die, the religious aspect reaches its climax. Lily wakes up in a heavenly-like field and sees Forrest with his wife and daughter, who have been killed years ago. Forrest approaches her and explains that they have been uploaded into the system a few days before the events of the series, where his family is still alive, and also Lily's boyfriend, Sergei. For Forrest, his faith in the Dev system has finally been repaid. He can live in an afterlife reunited with his family. So what does this series say about these scientists who have so much faith in science? That in Devs, faith becomes the driving force of scientific innovation, especially when these innovations challenge the fundamental aspects of society, such as free will and moral responsibility. In the history of science, we can note that scientists have always had some sort of faith. Isaac Newton, for example, he believed that God was a masterful creator, or the great architect, and by discovering the secrets of the universe, he would be closer to God. Others have a more fanatical faith in empiricism, such as the evangelical atheist Richard Dawkins. Bohm too had a spiritual approach to his work, which acknowledged faith and valued spirituality. Unlike Forrest, though, Bohm was not concerned about issues about free will, even though he did build a theory that can be interpreted as deterministic. But his metaphysical side lied more in wholeness and consciousness, which are both deeply intertwined in his physics. These were the subjects that he explored through dialogue with philosophers and spiritual leaders such as Krishnamurti and the Dalai Lama. But we can explore these aspects during our discussion. I've actually come up with two questions to sort of set us up. The questions are, does it matter if the world is deterministic? And how far is faith implicated in the scientific language? Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Do we now open up the session for group discussion? So anybody that would like to make a contribution or any questions for James or anybody else, please, we welcome your voice now.
I would like to ask a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Go ahead.
Thank you very, very much, James. I love how movie enter in our life. I didn't knew this series, and thank you. I discovered from your. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
My question is about language. Wittgenstein said the limit of your reality is bounded by your language. And in English, you said free will. In French, we said libre arbitre, a free ref. So I will ask you, the question is, what kind of difference can make in the language when you say free will or libre arbitre?
So what does liber arbitre mean? Like,
arbitre
what's
is
the
a
literal
ref. Like in a hockey game, you have a ref. You know.
Okay.
An arbitre is like a ref in a game.
Yeah. Well, so it's an interesting one, that one, because I mean, as you said, we are sort of bound by our language. So does free will determine, or at least our idea of free will, is that determined by our language? To me, I don't know, it must be because I'm bilingual. So for example, I know the word in Italian, which is very close to libero arbitrio, but of course the English as well, free will. But to me, free will and determinism, at least, refer more to basically the science-based idea of free will and determinism. So more on the classical idea, you know, what Newton said and Laplace's demon. To me, that is what free will is. But I don't know. I am unaware if other people with other languages may have a different idea. I don't know how many languages are present at the moment. Do we have any other translations of free will, which may give us an insight?
Well, in Italian, it's libero arbitrio. It's similar to French, but I don't think it resonates particularly with the referee of a football game. Or it refers to discriminating. Arbitrio is like choosing between different possibilities. Mm-hmm. And that it brings to my mind what one could call the epistemological objection to determinism, which is basically expressed in a very simple way. It's like, if you believe in determinism, is that because you're determined to believe that way? It's like, if you admit determinism, no statement has any truth value. You will say something just because you are determined to say so. So it not only erases ethical responsibility, it erases the provability of truth, or the whole system of science from a deterministic point of view is just an activity which could not have happened in any different way. You believe one theory rather than another because you're determined to believe that way. So it's like to the question whether do you believe in free will, it's like free will is the precondition of any meaningful statement about it.
Shantana, since you have some scholarship in Chinese, could you say something about the Chinese interpretation or understanding of free will versus determinism?
Well, I don't know it deeply enough, but so I just give you an impression about it. I would say the Chinese saw it as the playfulness of reality in a way. So it's like, not that you are believed to act in a certain way, but the whole universe is conspiring to something to happen one way or another. The way the various forces, elements are interacting with each other. But I don't know of any like firm statement in determinism by Chinese.
So maybe it's referred to the idea of a play, to play. In French, play is having a space. So space is the space you create with things. So maybe it's referred to the ideas of are we able to free play? Are we free to play, or we are determined to play in a certain kind of way? So maybe we can explore that in that way. So are we free to play the game of life, or it's a game that is already played before? So I think the idea of play, and that's referred to the ref. Is there a ref, a coach or a ref that fixes the rule of the game, or we are free to play with the rules of the game? So let's open a space.
Or to create the rules.
I think a helpful question might be, if I can insert it, is probability real?
Good question. Well, I think it depends on what interpretation you're looking at, really, because even so, the form of the Everett interpretation I presented is a version of the interpretation, because Everett has different interpretations of like branching, for example, or continuous parallel universes that never touch. So if we look, for example, at the probability I showed you, you could actually say that there's 100% chance that a coin lands heads or tails. There's no really 50-50 chance. It's always 100%. We just don't know the outcome.
James, can I take you from there to collapsing the wave function?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I know that your grandfather had a conversation with, I think, a biologist by the name of Buckley, and out of the University of Toronto, and they did a book together, which I haven't read. But the idea of doing that is interesting in terms of taking these ideas and making some relationship between physics and biology, which I think is what he had in mind. If we look at, for example, the collapse of the wave function in normal kind of Everett-like terms, and we translate that biologically, we're talking about birth. We're talking about being born and coming into a world, collapsing the wave function out of a field of possibilities of universes. This one we happen to be born in. The question therefore becomes, if we're talking about establishing a relationship between possibly multiple worlds. I just knocked that over. That was purely by chance.
Yeah, of course. It will always have happened.
Synchronicity, I think, but we don't have a Jungian here. But the idea is that this must do something physiologically to the brain. In that it said it takes about 16 months for a newborn to really sort of settle into the, to groove in with this world as it is, as it were. The question is, do we have the possibilities of loosening that kind of tight wire? Do we have the possibilities of reimagining other universes in ways that change the kind of neurological grooving that we get, let's say, over those 16 months? So this interface between physics in this Everett way and biology, which I must get a hold of that book that your grandfather wrote with, I think it's Paul Buckley, out of the University of Toronto. Yeah. Someone offered it to me once. I said, oh, I'll read it later. And it passed.
Right. What's the name of the book? Just
it's a book on biology. It was written by your grandfather with a biologist out of the University of Toronto called, I think, Paul Buckley.
It was Paul Buckley, and called A Question of Physics.
Wow.
It's not specifically to do with biology. It was a series of interviews with really top scientists, you know, who I think pretty well all of them have, you know, since died. There was like, I don't know, von Weizsäcker and Dirac and people like that.
Yeah.
It's very interesting interviews that he did with them. Heisenberg.
You know if it's still about, Maureen?
I'm sure you can still get a copy. Yeah, yeah.
From Pari?
No, not from us.
No.
You know, try on the internet. I mean, I'm sure there are still copies.
Yeah.
Around,
Yeah. But that's it.
Routledge reprinted it. Okay. It was
Sorry?
Routledge in England, who are the sort of academic publishers. They reprinted it, so I'm sure for Routledge, I'm sure it's still on the list.
Okay, and what was it called again?
A Question of Physics.
A Question of Physics.
Yeah.
And he was interviewing a biologist or some biologist.
I think, yes, maybe one or two biologists, but essentially they were physicists he was interviewing.
But I thought it was a biologist by the name of Buckley, who was
No,
the second author. No?
No, Paul Buckley was not a biologist. He was really more of a philosopher.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Biologist, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Just to add a little something, partly responding to you about probability. So the one I presented is obviously a interpretation of probability theory, which it was applied to Everett interpretation. But of course, there are other probability theories, such as the one that is sort of mainstream accepted by quantum theory, like, for example, the Copenhagen interpretation, where the probability is actually a real thing in a sense. You know, a cat is 50% dead or 50% alive. They're both simultaneously the same thing. The cat is dead and alive at the same time, even though it originally referred to the cat has a 50% chance of being dead or alive. So that's another one. So if you even apply it to choices, right? So say you're choosing, you're about two decisions, you're thinking about it. You can argue with that probability theory that you're actually doing both things until you finally decided what to do.
Okay, and there's a whole question of temporality here, and things happening in sequence rather than being pure potential in that way as well, and that in itself is a form of collapsing the wave function, right?
Yeah.
So I'd be just interested to see how, quite apart from Buckley and so on, how these ideas translate biologically. If we begin to think in kind of real terms, as this film asks us to do, about things like birth. That may be a very interesting cosmological question. What is that? And that kind of thing. But that's all I had to say. And I probably said too much, but I knocked over the glue. So
I can add a small comment to that. The key issue is, does the quantum indeterminacy, which is certainly there, the quantum uncertainty like in Heisenberg, does it translate on a macroscopic scale? Does it hold on a macroscopic scale? This was the issue raised by Schrödinger in a series of lectures he gave in Dublin in 1943, and which became later this precious little booklet called What is Life? His answer to the question was surprisingly no. Was like, by the time you come from the micro level to the macroscopic level, the law of big numbers or the averaging on large numbers of states completely hides the quantum indeterminacy. And so Schrödinger would I don't know if he explicitly concluded, but he could have concluded that no, then like at the macroscopic level, everything is determined. I think that's still an open question, and evidence that has accumulated since then shows that quantum physics can manifest at the macro level in various ways, so that the issue is quite more complex than Schrödinger could conclude in 1943.
And, you know, macro can have a very relative meaning as well.
Mm-hmm.
Big universe.
Can I say something about what seems to be a very central theme of Dev's, and that is death. I never realized that voiceover was that poem, James, and thanks. Really, I wish I'd heard your talk immediately after I finished Dev's, because it really put everything together for me, which was floating around in various places, you know. One of those stories. No, but death, you know, and I love when you ask the question, well, what happens to you after you die? After you die, you are what you were before you were born. And I don't know if there's anywhere in philosophy that speaks to that, but it rather speaks to me in that all of our problems about free will and determinism are the arrogance of being these marvelous hominids who have manipulated the world and grabbed hold of things and made it seem like we're in charge. And actually, if you look at the rest of the world, no one thinks they're in charge and they've got will to control stuff. From my little dogs through to the trees and the plants, they're just getting on with being with what they've got. And it's
well, there is, but he's going to be out of office in 2 weeks. So.
Pardon?
I said there is someone who thinks like that, but he's going to be out of office in a few weeks. So.
What do you think of that, James? I don't know. It's a horrible bird's eye view that reduces all this to, you know, well, that's our problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely agree that death is present in Devs. So, like, I think the first time death is sort of mentioned is when Forrest's head of security, he says he's smoking and he's saying, "Oh, I should really quit." And Forrest says, "Oh, don't bother." But because he knows he's going to die. So I know Forrest really believes in those tram lines.
Yeah, and it's the whole motivation of his everything. It's the whole motivation of the show, and Forrest's whatever he's doing because of the death of his wife and daughter. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Like even that scene where, I don't know if you remember that scene where Stuart recites the poem of Obad. Forrest walks in and says, "Oh, what's that? Shakespeare." No, he says, "Oh, what poem's that?" And Stuart says, "Well, guess." And he refuses to guess and then says, "Oh, I think it was Shakespeare," which it sort of underlines the fact that Forrest doesn't believe in this, you know, the grandiose project of learning the past, looking into the future. Also because the future is limited, as we've seen. You can look at the past as much as he wants, but the fact that he refuses even to guess that the poem was by Philip Larkin sort of goes to show that Forrest's motivations weren't really that noble. It was just to prove that he was guilt-free.
Right.
But no, I mean, I definitely agree that death is present there. Like, but the only, you know, the climax at the end is after the death, where he sort of seems to resurrect everyone he cares about.
You say guilt-free. Isn't he trying to deny death by reuniting himself with his dead loved ones? I mean, that's the ultimate human arrogance, that you could try and do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree there. Yeah, I mean, and of course that sort of goes with that whole religious aspect I was talking about, right? So like he declares himself as the Messiah. So what's his aim? Reaching the afterlife where his family is.
And Christ, Christ. That's what Jesus did.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of interesting what you said originally when you talked about before you were born. The Buddha says that recognition of the Buddha's nature was recognition of your original face before you were born. Mm. And St. Augustine says the same thing in the fourth century. Hang on to that.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Where does that place our worry over determinism or free will? Where does it place it? That's the question on this one. Where does it place it?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, what is prior to the wave? The wave collapse.
I guess that's sort of why we have this existential anxiety towards free will and death, right? Because if you have death, then you know that all your actions are limited. So they might as well be free. At least you know that you've lived fully. Yes. Because if you're immortal, I can't remember what it's called, but the fact that if everything goes to infinity, everything will happen. So it doesn't matter if they're free or not. It's the fact that we're going to die. That's why we care about free will.
Yeah, that's Nietzsche's eternal return.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That's the other version of Everett's multiverse. That that it doesn't matter if there's determinism or free will because it's all happening in one world or the other. And I suppose reincarnation and the eternal return is a bit like another answer to that. It's
100%.
There's a bit more evidence for Everett's view. Yeah. I really do think there is. Yeah.
You can think of how.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
I'm going to inject some strangeness, perhaps, by simply saying a simple sentence that I've been saying for many years. I believe that I am free at all times, in all places, in every situation. I have to hedge on this all of my life. I also believe that I am completely determined at the very same time. I have said this in arguments and midnight conversations with many people over my lifetime. I cannot defend it. I cannot do anything about it except to say it's what I believe, because I like the idea of Einstein. I don't know about Bohm, but certainly Einstein and numerous others. I don't like a world in which we can't explain what happens, in which there are effects that don't have a cause. And I espouse that idea. I like the idea of predictability, the idea of cause and effect, very much Leibniz. Does anybody pay attention to Leibniz at all? Everything is for the best in the best of all possible worlds. And Voltaire had great fun with that. And yet I believe that I'm free. I remember a very poignant conversation with a dying friend who had ALS and wanted to know, okay, do you believe, and this happened with two friends. And they looked at me rather pointedly at some point near their end and said, so do you believe in God? And I wasn't ready for the question. I didn't like the question. I didn't want to answer it by saying, oh, yes, I believe in God. Or, hell no, I don't believe in God. I didn't want to answer it either way. But I was forced, I was forced in both situations to say, I believe that we human beings are responsible for our actions. It's easy to say. And the one person who was dying it was a woman who was an attorney. She worked for the California Bar Association. And since she was an attorney, I came to the simple notion about free will. I said, our whole legal system, to the extent that that means something, depends on assigning responsibility to human beings for the things they do, for making them responsible, for believing they are responsible. If you, person X, in fact, murdered person Y, then you're responsible. And then, of course, from all the courtroom dramas and stuff that we've all watched over a lifetime, there's a lot of wrangling about how much guilt, how much responsibility, extenuating circumstances. And I don't want to go into all of that.
Paul, there's something about different about the indigenous notion of guilt. It doesn't exist. So it's more of a free, the First Nations take more of a free will approach to guilt. And that is, and I think it's in McLuhan refers to this in one of his books. The message, or the massage is the medium. The medium, yeah.
Yeah, it's actually interesting you mention that, Ferdinand, because in Blackfoot Physics, the book that my grandfather wrote about the Blackfoot, there's a paragraph a chapter where he talks about the justice system there, right? And he says that the people are not trialed for the gravity of the crime they committed. It's more, and it's not, the whole point is not to punish the person who's committed a crime. It's more to restabilizing the order within the community. Yeah. Now, obviously, there is some punishment. They have, for example, exile, but their main focus is how can we restore the harmony in the community after we've had this wound.
A two-word phrase that jumps into my mind that comes from my years of teaching and discipline in the classroom. And those two words are restorative justice. Can somebody speak to that?
Well, the other I've got in a book I wrote that I got from some 1950s anthropology work in a Guatemalan village, in that the shaman determined that who was responsible for a woman's condition was the parents and the ancestors of both her parents and her husband's parents on all sides. So everyone had to pay penance, and the woman herself was relieved of the burden of responsibility of her actions through that, which is really a very broad way of saying the whole community led up to this woman doing what she was doing and being in the state she was. And we just don't think like that these days. We're so individualistic. We think the individual is responsible for their own actions solely. And we completely forget the backstory and their whole environment, which is the context in which they created their actions.
Well, the danger that I had it hammered into my head over a lifetime, growing up in a Catholic system, was the social part of your being on the earth. You're being a human being. You're a participant in a society. And whatever you do, there are consequences all the time. There are consequences down to your speech and whatever. And to hear you say this about among the Guatemalan Indians, it resonates with something in me that I didn't know was there.
Because those consequences go the other way. The consequences impinge upon you as an individual as well as you impinging outward. And it's that rather collective thing that I think David was referring to in Blackfoot Physics, and I've come across in other anthropological work. Yeah. So that really breaks down determinism of free will, doesn't it? Whose determinism? Whose free will? Yeah.
Yeah.
And at that point, does it really matter? I mean, certainly the restorative justice part of it is fantastic. And I think in terms of Everett's multiple worlds, we too have responsibilities maybe in other areas as well.
Susanna, did you want to say something?
Yes, yeah. I'm sorry, I can't find the raise your hand.
That's fine.
The kind of conversation that we're having here is, I think, a typical one at this point. batting around what many of the thinking minds, which is disassociated from embodied practice. I posted Nature as Discourse, which is a short version of many years of study that I have put together in my doctoral work. But essentially, this cause and effect, if we see our species as a part of evolution, the basis of an evolutionary argument that is missing is phylogenetically, we inherited through a system of development of brains, which goes back to Schrodinger or any of the thinking things that have been mentioned that have been studied on a micro or macro scale. We have a nervous system that evolves connectivity to our higher neocortical, more recently evolved brain that is not yet fully carrying the capacity of its potential. Hewlings-Jackson's research indicates that we have a natural default system. It's a kind of short circuiting that goes on in our nervous system, which is a bidirectional capacity that naturally defaults to our lower centers, which is our survival instincts, basically. So at what point will education take this up as my work, what I am trying in the world? And this simultaneous reality of which Bohm and where we are with understanding the empirical laws, let's call them what they are, natural laws, is an investigation that only now can be learned through our apparatus. And what makes this a very exciting time, I think, for Bohm's work to be emerging is that whatever the quantum field, computers and so forth are, going to be capable of doing is going to actually come from those of us as the creative force. So we have to look very seriously at this bidirectional system, which gives us this greater capacity to move from our survival instincts to our psychic potentials. And I'm going to drop the name of an esoteric thinker who, of course, through history has had various characterizations, but we have to understand that the minds that respond or react through a cynical understanding are just that, still a child defense mind. And what unifies the three brains has to be our question. And I have been in the field of the esoteric studies of Ouspensky and Gurdjieff and the thinkers of what comes out of esoteric study, embodied practice and study. And in the Western science, I discovered Hewlings-Jackson and Dr. Stephen Porges' work on the vagus nerve. So as our parasympathetic system learns not to move and react into reactions, our actions towards the development of what we're trying to define as free will, this play between our reptilian and mammalian caring and defense reactions are the duality of which our politics and everything else revolve around. And so this why I'm working with the transdisciplinarity community in a World Congress at the moment, and with the Entropy Institute in San Francisco, which is taking up Schrodinger. We need to create the energy, refine the energy. So it's not just a loss of energy, but one of refinement. And then we are then vessels that can receive spirit and the field within this larger universe of which, you know, is running our lives basically on this, what he's calling the tram line. I wasn't familiar with the film before this morning, you know, so I have some homework to do. But I do think what you're doing, James, is very wonderful, because we need to visualize this. It's not science fiction really anymore.
Exactly.
You know, and that the Western empirical studies now connect with esoteric intuitions. This is the moment in history where East is meeting West truly with the capacity to move education forward. And so this is very exciting that you have this work together, and I'm very happy to be joined with all of you this morning.
Great, thank you very much, Susanna, for that input. Did I see Mariam have her hand up? Is that right?
Oh, right. Thank you. I appreciate it, James and Eleanor. I'm new to the group, so I'm a little bit, I guess, hesitant to jump right in here. And I appreciate, you know, you organizing the space and holding this container for the dialogue. I was not familiar with devs. I crash watched several episodes last night, and
very nice.
I looked up a really great interview with Alex Garland on YouTube about his motivation behind why he put together the series. And as I was listening to the dialogue, I was thinking, you know, we might benefit from revisiting some of these core concepts around what we mean by free will, determinism, and, you know, the topic of language came up. As a trilingual, I see the differences between how conceptual frameworks, you know, I agree with the Wittgenstein idea that the limit of your reality is, you know, relevant to your language. And so in addition to that, I'd like to posit that it's related to access of imagination. So when I look at quantum physics, I'm a layperson, but I have an interest, and I look at, you know, Bohm's writings and other people's writings. I see that we're basing it on a very Western view. And I think Susanna, you know, mentioned this. I recently presented to a group of academic leaders about the future of education. And so how do we integrate, you know, this integrated being, moving beyond Cartesian dualism and the disembodied cortex. And where I come to is this idea, I think, that was brought up around physics and collision flow. So having different concepts instead of waves and particles, this idea of collision flow and what's the nature of reality. If we look at cultural linguistic history and how languages have become extinct from Latin to, you know, various other languages, and we look at the study of anthropology, it's a very one-sided view that has dictated the whole discourse on philosophy. And I do see a return back to, you know, Eastern, Western, having all these fragmented pieces held as a whole. And I think it's related to our understanding and advancements in science and physics. And what I mean by that is, if we consider the idea of different planes, different dimensions, different ideas about how these correlated wholes work together in terms of our physiology, our embryonic origins, you know, our capacity to understand our consciousness and thought. I think there's a lot of exciting mysteries unfolding, and a lot of transliteration that needs to be done. As we embark upon transdisciplinary, we have to translate these concepts and these language definitions, I think, more fully. So I'm not sure where I'm leading to here, apart from saying, you know, the field of behavioral science is also very interesting when we look at market analytics and the way that people are using certain factors to predict consumer behavior. it's an interesting lens with which to look at free will and determinism. So that was it.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Marian. And yes, I mean, I do completely agree that, you know, I mean, especially, you know, having a bit of a Western mindset, right? Science has been guided by white Europeans. So like having, I think now, especially when there is a call for dialogue between white, black, east, west, and everything, I think now especially is the time to get more of that input now, especially with this call to come and talk together. So, and you know, this is regardless of physics and regardless of devs, this is sort of a science in general and all other disciplines. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, Mario.
Niels.
Is there anyone else?
Yes, I'm ready. This is new. I came in too late, so I haven't heard the first hour, but I come from a different perspective. I've come from a background as a civil engineer, and then I went into computing, where I've been for 49 years. And I was well versed in physics and also quantum mechanics. It's not that remote from how I think. So, and I've developed a transportation model, which about 30 years ago, it's been used for various projects like airport, complete airport with all the everything's simulated. But at the base of that, I got to a point where I got something. It was complete. It was whole. It could find all the possible or all the equal paths in a network just at a flick of a hand, and ever since I developed this, I've been trying to see if there was anyone else with the same kind of mindset. And at the moment in transportation, they ignore me completely because they obviously don't understand it, because it's like a miracle that you can create a field in which you only got all the shortest paths. You can identify them like signposts, if you like. I think there's someone called Pierce who has a theory about that, but I think he didn't actually have a model for how to do it, but he saw that these various probabilities of going this way and that way. And that, in my system, that is deterministic. And the interesting thing, and then you can have all kinds of levels of, what is it called, variations, which we are saying that in quantum mechanics, we believe that because we can measure various things, but we can't know exactly where the particle is. And it's exactly the same in transport. And if you have people movements and people moving contra to one another and all this interaction. So just to say in the short, I came up with the idea that the transport network is like a neural network. It was interesting to see that they actually have images now on the neocortex, and it looks like a transportation network. And the decisions are in the neurons, of course, because that's where it happens, in the dendrites and the axons and all that. But it's the same mechanism that at the macroscopic level in a transportation network, it's exactly the same mechanisms. So at one time, because I never found anyone that had this. And if you know something about computer science, they talk about a master algorithm, and they also talk about superintelligence. So in effect, this model I have, all you need to know is what time it takes on individual links in order to optimize it in terms of time. And you can then direct them on the path. A little bit like our navigation now with with Google and that kind of thing. But the problem is with Google that they don't optimize it for everyone. So, and the interesting thing about this superintelligence is that it optimizes it for everyone. So it's like it creates equality, if you like. So that's what I'm saying. And because in terms of consciousness, I believe that consciousness has to do, in this respect of modeling, it has to do with you got to be conscious when you make a decision of where to move next as you come to the end of this road section.
Yeah.
And also, and if we have this transport model, like a mind or brain, if everyone follows the direction of, it's like a God sitting there who can direct everyone for the benefit of everyone. And I believe that if there is a God, that would be the nature of God. And within that, there's free will, because I can decide how I navigate through this system entirely myself.
When you say optimize, could you explain that?
Yes.
The optimization and free will still in the same?
Yes, it is still, but if you're a freewheeler, you cannot make the optimal decisions. So you actually make the whole thing function less well, but the mind of God can direct everyone else to the benefit of everyone else. So it's
I guess that's where human error comes in.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
more optimal to have a computer make a decision for you, because it'll be the best decision.
Yes.
We make mistakes.
Yes. And let me just finish. I eventually got to Robert Sheldrake with his I can't remember now, but his fields of I can't remember what the phrase is, but and then in one of his books I read about Bohm and Bohm about wholeness and implicate order. So immediately I read his book, and I realized that the part that creates all the paths, what I would call the intelligence behind it, is pure implicate order. That was interesting when I found out that. I also realized that Bohm actually didn't get to the end of it. It was sad when I read his book about the undivided universe. I cried when I found out that he had died just on the cusp of the edge of sorting out. But I believe somehow I have a feeling I know what that edge was, because in a very early paper he did, he actually talked about different waves. There was like you could call it the implicate wave. That would be like, if you think about movement from a start till a finish, you proceed a wave from the finish. And that's exactly the implicate order. In a transport wave model, you also send a wave out, but they go different trajectories, and because depending on the course of the road system. So I believe that, but he rejected that. I think it came out in a paper in '52, and then he shared it with Einstein, and Einstein said, no. But the irony is that that is exactly the major implicate order. And I could see that once I understood what he was about.
It's very difficult. Your perception, Niels.
Yes.
Your grasp of that, it seems to me, is very difficult. I don't know how others here.
Oh, it's difficult, but I can actually prove it as well.
And that was exactly I went through.
And mathematics can't do it. It's a computer algorithm, and it's very simple. It cascades out, and as it cascades out, it knows the time and lengths to the destination, if you like. So when it comes to, if you think about that in a transportation network that cascades out, and you find all at each little section of that it cascades along, you can calculate the minimum distance, either in time or other things, to the destination. So if you then start navigating in this system, then these act like pointers to if you have a branch, then it will tell you that one is the shortest. But there could be another branch that would be equally short, if you see.
It sounds like my sat nav in the car.
Yes, but this is
information from all sorts of other sources that are totally blind to me, like traffic is and everything, and calculating time for going backwards and forwards that is so indirect to my will that it is helping me with a bigger picture or something. Is it like that?
Yes, in fact, I mean, I am a Christian. I've been since I was a little boy, because my father took his own life, and I was puzzled about this, and my mother married again, and no one told me about this. So I was about 5, and I didn't know what had happened to him. And I was like talking to yourself, and suddenly you just got this feeling of peace, and like a small voice saying, "It will be fine. You will be all right." And as a Christian, I have that relationship with what I call the Holy Spirit. So it relates also to what you're talking about, in a sense.
Can I echo? I have a friend who is in a discussion group. It's a spiritual discussion group.
Yes.
We've met since March. A young lady who, when she was 4 years old, had a pet rabbit.
Yeah.
This is different from your own father, but this experience you just narrated was recounted by this woman who is now 93 about the effect of the death of that rabbit on her, and how jumbled, how meaningless, how disturbed her world as a 4-year-old child became by that death. And at some point, and I cannot connect in her story, she told a out-of-body experience where she saw herself in a room, outside herself, looking down on her bed. It was very much, it was astral projection or whatever that is.
Yes.
And this is a very warm, wonderful, spiritual, kind, artistically gifted woman. And I was completely ignorant, and still am ignorant of this experience. But for you to say it here, it reverberates. And it's like order. We have a perception of order, that wherever we get it, we have a perception of order.
Yes, and peace, I think is
wholeness.
Wholeness, yes.
And coherence.
Yeah.
And when it gets disturbed, for me, sometimes I experience it as almost, it's physical. My being bothered by the incoherence that seems to swallow us all up. And so
I'm gonna have to stop you guys only because we've gone way over time today.
Yes. Oh,
but I
sorry.
thank you guys
I'm
all
sorry.
for your contribution. No, thank you guys for your contribution. I don't know, James, do you have? I don't know if you have some closing remarks, but I also wanted to give a second to Chris if you wanted to talk about the next session that will be on January 30th. Chris, do you have anything you wanted to say?
Okay.
Very briefly, it's called The Role of Horror and Terror, the Antithesis of Being Glad to Be Alive.
Yes.
And it's about the role of horror and terror in literature and in film that actually addresses our assumptions of rationality about human life and brings in really what I was referring to a little earlier, the irrationality of our human lives and how we're hanging by a thread, and how in our human production, artistic production, in films and literature, the role of horror and producing terror, which we're drawn to as an entertainment, actually starts addressing some of our doubts that we're in charge.
Cool.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Okay, James, over to you.
Well, I don't have any closing remarks, really. I just wanted to thank everyone to join me today for this presentation and also for the launch of this series, which I think I hope everyone's enjoyed. And and next time we'll be with Chris talking about horror. So join us next month, and that will be on the 30th of January. So please do come to that.
Yes.
And also on the link that we've just sent through, it has also the suggested reading and viewing. So please click the link. No, I mean, for the session, that's it. I just want to make just two more announcements about our events next year. First, I'm going to announce the next major conference that we'll be having at the Party Center. It will be a virtual conference again due to restrictions, and it will be entitled Synchronicity, Mind and Matter. And it will be a 4-week program with 8 sessions with frankly amazing lineup, I think. We've got Alan Coombs, Roderick Main, Cruz Sabadini, Chris Robinson, Remo Roth, Shantina Sabadini, Yuriko Sato, and Jean-Francois Vinzena, who's here with us, and Shantina's here with us as well. In this course, we will focus on synchronicity as a gate to deeper understanding of the relationship between mind and matter, and as a guide to read the archetypal energy configurations we encounter in everyday life. This experiential approach to synchronicity will use the I Ching, the Chinese oracle, as a tool for inviting synchronicity. And this will run in February, is that right? February, March, yes, February. And then finally, we have another one-off session in January, January 16th, with Oliver Freire Jr., who was with us during the summer series on Bohm. And Oliver Freire is a historian of science based in São Paulo in Brazil, who will give a talk called What is the Next Scientific Breakthrough? Where by looking at historical accounts of paradigm shifts, he will try and give informed speculations and where the next scientific breakthrough will happen. So please visit our website and you'll find there. If you want to contact us, there's a contact us page on our website, or just email us at james@partycenter.com or eleanor@partycenter.com. And also, as this is our last session before the new year, I'd like to wish everyone Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a Happy New Year. And yes, thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you again soon here at the Party Center.
And thank you, James. Wonderful.
Thank you, James. Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, everyone.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, James.
Here, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you all.